This evening in the studio with me I've got Michael Barnett, Chair of the Business Leaders Group, a recently formed Auckland Council Quango. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
And Patrick McVeigh. Patrick is the Manager of the Business Development arm of ATED, the Auckland Tourism Events and Economic Development Unit of Auckland Council. And this evening I thought that we'd start by playing out the last of Greg Clark's piece. Greg tonight is looking at his view of the 4 quadrants of a good city.
Cities need to have a story in sort of 4 quadrants. I'll be very quick with this, but one is the citizen quadrant, where you're talking about what it's like to live here. And a lot of Auckland's play is around it's great to live here. So the citizen story or the citizen brand is very strong here. The second one is around visiting, and I think you've convinced a huge number of people now that this is a great place to visit, and it clearly is, right? The third one is around business and investor, where essentially it's about the rate of return, the opportunity, it's about the entrepreneurial environment and climate you can find here, and that story is not being told at all. So even if people think, I'd like to live in Auckland, they're not at all convinced they'd like to set up a business here or trade here, because so that bit has to complete the story. Otherwise, the livability advantage doesn't come into play because you haven't reached square one. The fourth quadrant is what I would call the innovator or leader quadrant, and a lot of the kites I was flying at the end, sort of just ideas that I've picked up from the conversation of the past few days about things that would make Auckland really distinctive and really relevant to the rest of the world, would make Auckland memorable in people's minds. Those are things really in that leader-innovator quadrant. So I think of it in that way, and what I'm saying is there's a good livability story, a great livability story, there's a great visitor story, there's no business story, there's no leader story.
So gentlemen, I'm sure that you've got varying ideas on Greg Clark's view of Auckland. Perhaps just starting, Michael, with you, looking at the leadership issue and business leadership within Auckland, what's your take on Greg's analysis?
I think it would be easy to interpret that as saying that there's perhaps no leadership, and in fact I think what we're really looking at in Auckland is that there's too much leadership or confused leadership. And if you have a look at the voice of Auckland, and from a business perspective, we have a Chamber of Commerce and we have an EMA and we have a Heart of the City, we have a committee for Auckland. And I think what Greg is saying is that if you're going to make real progress, we should try and bring those leaders together and have a central voice, have one voice that really does speak on behalf of Auckland and then really does get some stuff done here so that we get change. So that's my interpretation of his message.
So the leadership group haven't developed the terms of reference as yet, but your thinking is that that group would then take the spokesmanship role, especially when we're trying to export a message out beyond Auckland, out beyond New Zealand.
I think what's more likely to happen is that the leadership group will identify 6 or 8 agenda items that they would believe, if we can do something about these issues now, so this isn't a long game, this is a short game, if we can do something about these issues over the next 12 months and make a real difference, then that leadership group will take responsibility for it. The people that will make up a part of that group will have either specialisation or passion or commitment to whatever those agenda items might be. So the leadership group I see as stepping in, making a difference, but making a difference in short-term agenda items.
So Patrick, just turning to the idea of perhaps business fizz, a business story. Auckland doesn't have a business story. I've been thinking about what New Zealand's business story is, and perhaps it's milk, and of course Michael going up to China tonight to talk that story. What business stories would you see as Auckland having to get out?
Well, I think, Kane, that this is also an issue about how the city's maturing. So I'm not sure it's right to say it just doesn't have a single business story. I mean, it has, I think, probably multiple business stories in terms of Auckland as a city. I think the points that Greg was trying to make about is how we establish and communicate our identity internationally. So, as he said, in terms of visitor and destination, over the last few years, we've really managed to be able to kind of take that to a new level, create a new platform. I think the issue for us now as a city is how we actually start to capture the business benefits of that identity. So developing through the work of the Business Leadership Group a kind of common narrative about Auckland's future and Auckland as a place to invest, I think will be a really important component in us following up from the discussions when Greg was here.
So this has been a process that's been going on for some time. It's not just since Greg Clark's arrival. Whereabouts on the continuum are you as ATED, Business Development Group, in process?
Well, as you say, it is a continuum. And over the last few years, the work that's been done across Auckland and through Council to develop the strategies is a very important component of that. So obviously we have the Auckland Plan, we have the Economic Development Strategy, but the focus now has to be on that move into implementation. So we're coming to the end of the first long-term plan period. There's work underway to think about the next long-term plan period and what are the opportunities and areas for investment. I think some interesting moves afoot with things like the creation of an Auckland Investment Office, and that ties into this kind of whole story about what is the investment opportunity within Auckland, what's the investment need, how do we build a better kind of story externally about that opportunity within Auckland. I'd say that some of the developmental work around that's been done. The issues have been identified through the sort of the Auckland Plan and the Economic Development Strategy. We're starting through that conversation that Greg helped facilitate to sort of narrow our areas of focus to say these are the combined areas we need to work together in order to deliver more. And whether that's around things like youth employment or a better business story and leveraging things like the international events. And we obviously established a really strong program and a strong identity around events. We now actually need to think about how we leverage those for a business benefit. And I think that's where the Business Leadership Group starts to come into play, because that's why we talk about that as a Business Leadership Group. It's really about getting a kind of a tripartite agreement between government, businesses, other stakeholders around what are the key areas that Auckland needs to focus on, needs to invest in. And the changes that we're trying to create through things like the Auckland Plan to create the world's most livable city, they're not the responsibility of just council. It's impossible to think that the objectives within plans and strategies can be created by just one body. And the thing I think we're looking for with the new Business Leadership Group is to try and get that kind of common agreement on the way forward.
So Michael, would the Business Leadership Group, would your primary link into central government be through the Business and Innovation arm? How would, who or what organisation within central government are you going to be linking in with first?
See, I don't see any one particular link that we would have. So if I go back to what Patrick is saying, I think we're moving the model. So if you look at the continuum that we're looking at, we've probably moved from a government-driven initiatives where then you're moving into a government and business-led initiatives. So it's more of a shared leadership that we're looking at now. So when I have a look at that shared leadership, some of the things that we'll need to achieve from that should help us move forward at a good rate. So if I take, for example, the issue of prioritisation, I think one of the big things that Auckland business, the people of Auckland need to appreciate is there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done, but we can't do it all. And I think that if we can accept the fact that these are the priorities, then it's going to be the case that the Business Leadership Group should be prepared to step up and carry the case. And if we're going to carry the case, we should be carrying that case to the people of Auckland or to central government or to a particular part of central government so we can get acceleration on whatever it is that we're doing.
So in terms of priorities, has there any work been done between the two organisations as to what those priorities might be?
I'll quickly come back to that short-term agenda because I think Patrick lives in a world of long game, but there's also short game attached to that. And I think when I have a look at some of the things that we could be doing and doing better, is around youth employment and employability. I think investment, and Patrick referred to investment, but you know, when I have a look at Auckland City and 19 or 20 sister cities out there that we've used as cultural links, look at the opportunity that we have to go out and treat them as global partners, where you could take a prospectus to and talk about the massive amount of infrastructure investment we're doing down here, housing, construction and so on. So we can take all of that and take it offshore, but then I get back to the story about telling Auckland's story. So all of these things link, but they're going to link into an agenda of half a dozen items that we really do need to address in the short term.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I think one of the kind of important components that came out of those discussions that we had with Greg was that this wasn't us starting with a blank sheet of paper. We'd already done the work around the kind of planning and the strategy. It was just trying to say, how are we going to actually now bring public and private sector together around some of those key areas and opportunities. So another example which came out of the discussions, which we're already active on, but we're saying let's focus a bit more kind of directly, is this issue about how we maximise the opportunities for growth that come out of some of the investments that are already being made. So we think about that, the housing accord and the sort of the Auckland Housing Office that's been established. We think about the decision around CRL. These are all real investments that are being made or will be made within Auckland. How do we actually ensure that we get the most out of those? So one of the things that's been created across the Auckland Council and across the CCOs is this new Central City Integration Group, which looks at all of those investments that are scheduled through the centre of the city over the coming years and thinks about how do we get the most integration and the most out of those. So an issue of getting to scale on certain areas of activity to get the most benefits.
Just listening, you're talking hard infrastructure. Michael, you're sort of talking soft infrastructure in terms of people and unemployment, employment and employability, linkages.
Yeah.
They all have consequences.
And they all relate to each other.
Yeah, they interrelate. But you know, if you have a look at telling Auckland's story, and telling Auckland's story is going to be a part of attracting investment and attracting immigration here that's going to bring skills, that's going to help us achieve some of the construction and housing and you know, the growth of Auckland. So yes, I'm probably talking soft, but on the same count, it links into that long-term game that, you know, that Patrick and his team are setting out for Auckland.
So the short term, what sort of timescale are you thinking short term?
Short term for me, when I have a look at right now, youth unemployment in Auckland probably sitting around 20%. Maori and Pacific Islands probably up closer to 30%. That's a here and now problem. There are some things we're doing well, we need to bring them to scale. That needs to happen now. Attracting investment in here, that's a here and now problem. I've got 20 global partners sitting out there. When am I going to talk to them? How quickly can I talk? Right now, we've got 30% of Auckland businesses saying they're having difficulty getting the right people with the right skills. When am I going to be offshore telling a story about Auckland's growth, but attracting people who are going to come down here and live and work and play? So to me, these are here and now issues.
I mean, your wheels are spinning.
We're definitely spinning. But
why haven't you got a terms of reference now? I'm puzzled by this.
Well, again, when I have a look at the pace at which we've moved, the city has had a business advisory panel operating in the past. You know, a group of thousands, and you know, having a nice little chat to the council and so on, and that's a good thing. But we've moved on. What we need right now is a change. We need a partnership, a shared leadership, and we need to knock some of this stuff off. To do that, we need to change the model, put out the advisory panel and get in a group that are going to create some action. That was one of the outcomes of Greg's visit. He was only here a couple of weeks ago. We've got most of the group formed. We've got our agenda items of at least 6 or 8 things that we're going to knock over this year.
So you've already got your list?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, I think one of the things, just to come back to part of the intro, Kane, as well, I think it'd be a mistake to look at this as a quango. You know, this is not a bit of machinery of council. It's an important group for the city, which council endorses and will work with. And things like terms of reference, they all have to be there, of course. But actually, the drive that we're trying to get here is let's make some progress on some of these key areas, because some of these immediate things that Michael's talking about, you know, I think they are part of the long-term change that we're looking for. We can't just say, well, we're focused on this over the longer term, but actually if we don't do some of these things now, address issues around unemployment, build a much stronger business marketing campaign and kind of business identity, tie that into things like the opportunity around investment opportunities within Auckland, we'll never get to the long term.
So just to wrap up, has this change in approach flowed over into ATEED? Have you changed your models internally?
Well, we're obviously part of the group. So, you know, we were there at the start of the conversation. We encouraged and we sort of worked with Greg to kind of get the conversation happening. We've been working closely with Council and with Michael over the last few weeks since Greg was last here to actually start looking at how we do this. So at the moment we're probably meeting every week to talk about some of those things. Our board have been kind of briefed and will be involved in some of those conversations as we move forward as well.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, so perhaps in a couple of months we can reconvene and just do a check to see how things are running, because it sounds like it's a real change. So thank you both very much.
Pleasure.